Welcome, fellow explorers. My name is Christian Alexanderson, and this is Hemlocks to Hellbenders, a podcast highlighting Pennsylvania's parks, forests, and great outdoors. That is the sound of a common loon. It's the largest member of the diver family of birds and can be found throughout the United States, Mexico, Canada, Greenland, Iceland, and parts of Europe. This is the sound of a ruffed grouse, the state bird of Pennsylvania. Males claim their territories with a ritual display. They beat their wings in a series of thumps that builds to a crescendo. Okay, what about this one? What kind of bird is this? This is a warbling vireo. They are mainly olive gray on the head and upper parts with white underparts. They have brown eyes and the front of their face is light. Its breeding habitat is open deciduous and mixed woods from Alaska to Mexico. Whether you're hiking in ancient forests or picnicking in an urban park, birds are all around us. From the common pigeon on a Philly stoop to a bald eagle soaring above the Susquehanna River, the avian world is vast in Pennsylvania. Birding is the observation of birds in their natural habitats. Often seen as a hobby for old fogies, the activity has gotten a boost of interest and young blood as a result of the pandemic. When we were required to self-isolate and avoid travel, people found birding as a way to explore the natural world in their own backyards. In my experience, my friends either began gardening, baking sourdough bread, or became birders. Sometimes all three. Apps like Merlin and eBird have aided beginning birders in the difficult task of identifying and keeping track of the birds they've seen and heard. As travel restrictions laxed, countless birders took to Penn's woods to bird in new places. They visited Presque Isle State Park, where more than 339 species of birds have been identified on the peninsula. They visited Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, where an average of 18,000 raptors are counted flying during the 4-month autumn migration. With binoculars in hand and with an acute ear, Pennsylvania birders have the opportunity to identify hundreds of bird species without ever traveling outside of the Commonwealth. From Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, new birders are exploring our shared outdoor spaces. This growing hobby now has roots in places and communities that have never been represented in the past. Black and brown, LGBTQIA+, and impaired communities are forming their own birding groups, clubs, and organizations. They're showing that birding is a hobby for everyone, everywhere. And for this episode, I'm thrilled to speak to one of those people that are making birding and the outdoors more inclusive and accessible for all Pennsylvanians, no matter your race, background, sexuality, ability, income, or experience. I'm excited to welcome Jason Hall to the podcast. Jason is a Philadelphia-based birder and founder of the In Color Birding Club. Jason, thanks so much for joining the program.
Thanks for having me, Christian. Happy to be here on Hemlocks and Hellbenders.
What sparked your interest in birding?
When I was in high school, I had a big love of science. I'm a scientist today, and I had the opportunity my senior year to take a class that I didn't need, but I thought was interesting. It was an environmental science course, and we spent the first hour and a half every day outside in the park behind my high school in Upper Darby. And one of my assignments was to, during the course of the semester, sketch the birds that came into my assigned space. And I remember sketching a tufted titmouse and spending a number of hours with that species of bird during the course of the semester. And I just kind of fell in love with it. I kind of fell in love with the fact that I had walked through that park every day for 4 years of high school to get to school and never noticed anything more than the robins and the cardinals. Right. And here's this bird that obviously had been there. So that was kind of like somebody removing the filter from your eyes, and you all of a sudden see all these creatures that you didn't even realize were there.
How would you say your interest in birding has evolved over time?
Oh, that's a great question. So in high school, I learned how to do it, and I did it kind of leisurely. We didn't have all the tools that we have today, like eBird and Merlin, and it wasn't accessible for me to deal with the listservs and the call lists and all the stuff that they used back before the internet really took off. But in college, I didn't do a lot of it. I did it when I was hiking, but the hiking was the thing I wanted to do with my dogs and like get outside. And so I would take note of different birds I saw, but I wasn't studying. After college, I had a friend bought me my first DSLR camera for my birthday, and I remember I was in my apartment and I took a picture of some brown-headed cowbirds in a pine tree outside my window. And I thought I was about to get hired by National Geographic. I was like, this is it. Like, obviously, this is what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life. And so that led me down a road of just photographing birds. And then by around 2013, I found eBird so I could log everything I saw, upload the pictures, throw them on Flickr. And so I did that for a number of years. Um, then I got more into listing, which is a big part of birding, which is, how many different bird species have you seen in your county, in Pennsylvania, in the United States, in the world, right? And so I had to travel a lot for work. I was in India, and Turkey, and Europe, and Brazil. And so I would schedule, if I could get a free weekend, I would schedule a bird guide and go out in the countryside and look at birds. So it wasn't until the first Black Birders Week in 2020 that I realized how many other Black birders were out there, and that really jolted me out of my current state, right, where I just considered myself an exception, and I was listing and I had friends, but I was always usually the only person of color in my circle. um, and so once I realized I was on, what was formerly known as Twitter, one day during the first Black Birders Week, where you're introducing yourself, and just hundreds of different Black birders from all around the country, some of them around Philly. So once that happened, I was on a totally different trajectory. I was on a trajectory of, how can I take this activity, this joyful experience, and open it up to as many people that look like me as possible. So that's kind of where I am now, running a nonprofit, trying to do that.
Well, let's talk more about that. In 2021, you created In Color Birding Club. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so like I said, that first Black Birders Week in 2020 just blew my mind, right? And I spent almost the entire year trying to figure out what I was going to do, because I was so impressed with the folks that put that on at Black AF and STEM, and a lot of them honestly were younger than me significantly. And I was like, man, I got to do something to contribute to this, because it's so necessary. And I just looked around the Philly scene, and then the few different bird clubs, some of them very historic, been around for over 100 years. And as you look at their history and their websites and some other things, you just didn't see anything that was very specifically and consistently there for people of color, right? Um, and so I decided, well, what if I started a bird club, right? Like, it's a club. How hard could it be, right? And I sat down with two of my great friends, Angela and Jeff, who are not people of color, but some of my best friends. And I, kind of sheepishly told them about the idea. And before I could finish it, they both were like, "In, tell us what you need," right? And that was the beginning of it. We found some great partners in Valley Forge Park Alliance and Fairmount Park Conservancy, and yeah, it just kind of took off from there. And it took some consistency in the outings and the message to really build the community, right? It didn't happen right off the bat, because people were skeptical. So that's kind of where it is now. We're a certified, the government knows we exist now. We're a 501c3. We have to file paperwork every year. And that happened in 2022. And, we do 30 to 40 outings per year. We do events with schools. We raise money for food drives, for bus sponsorships is a big program that we're going to have again this spring, where we fund buses to green spaces for schools in Philly. um, looking to, hopefully in 2024, one of the big things we want to do is get into some conservation work, right? Finally kind of get that leg standing up, even if it's something as simple as adopting a trail and building some bluebird boxes and putting together a program to manage those and report into the different authorities that we would need to for that. So yeah, we're looking forward to 2024. So that's kind of where we are.
Did you feel like there wasn't a safe space for birders of color, or that there wasn't an organization focused specifically on bringing together birders of color locally?
Yeah, yeah. I really, the, let's talk about the safe space first, right? So, um, I know it's a trigger word for a lot of people or a trigger phrase, right? But really, what we're talking about is based on your experiences in life, your experiences in the outdoors. Do you feel comfortable going into new places that you want to explore, that you want to experience, but maybe are afraid, right? Because you saw some things on the news from that space, right? Or you saw some political signage when you were driving it that made you feel just a little uncomfortable, right? Someone said something to you at a rest stop or at a restaurant, right? And so these things are things that happen to Black and Brown people all over the country, right? And have, historically, right? And we have to accept that as a fact. Um, so then you bring it to birding, right? And birding is historically an old white guy activity, has been from the jump, right?
Yeah.
That's also a fact, right?
Hmm.
Birding in itself, though, doesn't need to limit itself to one type of person, right? So, really, you got to ask yourself, me as an individual, I said, okay, well, you know, what is it about birding that is not reaching my brothers and sisters in different Black and Brown communities, right? And you realize it's a lot of institutionalized racism. There's political things that happen around the city. Where is there green space? Where is there not green space? Right? There are commercial things. Right? Are the outdoor companies advertising to Black and Brown folks? Are these fancy optics companies doing that? Are the birding institutions doing that? The ornithology institutions? And so you realize that at that moment where a Black or Brown person wants to go somewhere and try something like birding, all of these things from their entire life, in some cases, is telling them, that's not safe for you. Right. And so I think a lot of people have to understand that perspective, right? It would be the same if you and I got, we said, hey, we want to go birding in the Congo, right? Or
Hmm.
Chad, right? Yeah, if they just dropped us in there, I don't know that we would know what to do with ourselves, right? Because neither one of us has any experience with that community, how they feel about outsiders, what the customs and the norms are. And so we would be totally probably overcome with some anxiety and some fear, even though we want to experience the nature and the outdoors. So really that's how I want people to think about it, right? You have to accept that there's just some things that we don't have the perspective on, and we have to accept that first before we create the pathway for people to get in. So yeah, there really wasn't, I say, an established understanding of safety for Black and Brown folks when it came to getting into the outdoors around Philadelphia for birding specifically, right? I mean, this is Black and Brown folks. We've been outside for a long time, right? But birding was not something that we were typically in. And so around the city, you had Bird Philly, Delaware Valley Ornithological Club. That's the one of the most historic ones, the most historic one, I would argue, probably on the East Coast. Um, you have a couple of other smaller Audubon groups, so Windcote Audubon, Valley Forge Audubon, Mid Atlantic Audubon, but none of them really explicitly put it out there like, hey, no matter who you are, come here and we're going to create on ramps to get you here. We're not just going to say it and wait for you to show up. We're going to create, like, nobody was really doing that. So that's why I created In Color Birding Club, to say specifically, we're going to make sure that you have people around you, you're comfortable, you have gear, you get the basics, nobody makes you feel stupid, right? Like, all of that was necessary to get folks over the hump.
I think one of the most interesting things I've learned recently when it comes to outdoor recreation is when companies or organizations say this event's for everybody. They tend to think, well, that just means everyone from a diverse background will be coming to the event. And that's just not the case.
No,
No.
no, it's not. And I've talked to other organizations. I'm also a board member at Valley Forge Park Alliance and the Aubrey Arboretum over in the historic Germantown section of Philly. And one of the conversations we have is about consistency, right? Like you can't just say it and think people are going to show up. I'll give you a great example. The Valley Forge Park Alliance, we put on, first very specific outreach to the communities in Pottstown and Norristown and Philly to come out to what they call the March In, right? It's a reenactment of George Washington marching into Valley Forge. It was butt cold that night, right? But we brought food. We met at the Washington Chapel, right? It was great. We had 3 people show up. Right? I think we invited like 15 to 20, but those 3 were amazing, right? We had amazing conversations, right? And I told the folks there, I said, look, it's not about quantity here, right? It's about creating really good, consistent connections. And really, that's just the first of it, right? If we never reach out to those 3 folks again, that's our fault, right? Because we didn't create the consistency. And so that's what I would like to explain. And I think commercial companies understand this, just a matter of whether they do it or not. To me, this lesson is more for nonprofits, community organizations that really have their heart in the right place, but they get discouraged early on because people aren't beating down their door now from these different communities. One of the key things I tell people to do is go to that community. Don't have your event and wait for them to come out to you, right? Go to them. But there's parks there, there's community centers there. Just find a connection, take your messaging. It won't always hit, but that consistency and that effort is really what's going to build the community that you want to have.
Plus, I would have to believe members of the community know who is acting authentically and who is not. I would have to think that
Yeah,
somebody who shows up one time and they go, "All right,
that's right.
we're looking for black birders," and then 3 show up, and you're like, "Well, why didn't 50 show up?" It's like, "Well, you just came here," and
Yeah, that's right.
yeah,
That's right. You didn't invest anything in the community, right? And that was really, we have a 6 of us on the board now, and every time we plan events that are, more than just showing up to go birding around Philly, we talk about, well, how are we going to get people there? Should we get food? What else do we need to bring? Hand warmers, blankets. What kind of message do we want to have? To get people comfortable in that space. It's going to be new, right? Like these things are not always talked about historically with outdoor ventures, right? There's just kind of this. There's always been this idea of like, show up and learn and pay your dues and da da da, right? But we can't do this with these communities that have been underexposed to birding, right? You have to build some trust. And really the key thing, I'm gonna say it again, is consistency, right? Like you can have your heart in the right place, but if you're not consistently engaging, which takes work and effort, I'm not gonna pretend like it doesn't.
and investment.
Investment, right? It's that's where you're going to make the difference, right? Because even if you show up to that community center and people say, oh well, this looks great, and then they never see you again for another 6 months, right? They're going to be like, oh man, like it's going to seem super performative, and we've all kind of seen those things happen, right? We're getting ready to head into Black History Month, so it's about to be some stuff, right? That these companies don't, or institutions don't do anything for the other 11 months of the year. So like, you really want to focus on that, right? And I think there's a lot of folks out there, in particular allies, right? People that want to invite different folks into this community and help build something different for them that have to get comfortable with that concept of consistency, right? And you're not always going to get somebody coming around and patting you on the back and say, "Good job, ally," right? Like sometimes you're not going to get that, right? But if you consistently show up, you consistently invest, you will get something even better. You will get something that will outlast you, and it'll be a consistent relationship. And you would have exposed other folks to this great thing that you love so much, right?
What sort of events and meetups do you guys host?
Yeah, so we do bird outings, right? So we'll do them all around the city. John Hines, different spots in Fairmount Park, Discovery Center. We'll do Valley Forge, obviously. Um, all the ones locally around Philly are pretty much just show up. We provide free binoculars for anyone that needs them. Usually some snacks or something, if depending on what the event is. And we provide bird guides, right? So we will We'll tell you what they are. We'll tell you some facts. We'll crack some jokes. We really try to we make everybody introduce themselves when we start so they can all feel comfortable and recognized. Um, those are kind of the base events, right? Then we'll do field trips sometimes. So we'll go up to Hog Mountain, right, and we'll rent a mini coach bus. And we'll ride up there comfortably, and we'll meet up with MT and the program directors up there, and we'll hike up, and we'll talk about different things, enjoy the view. It's a great way for people to get out of the city. Last year, we did our first trip out to Middle Creek to see the snow geese, right, and that was insane because it was so cold as it usually is in like February, and people get off the bus, they walk out there, you see 50,000 geese take off. It's amazing. It blows your mind. And then you're like, oh, it's cold. And so people got some hot chocolate and went back to the bus. But it was great, right? It was great. This year, we're looking to plan some trips to Central Park, maybe Cape May, a couple other spots to get a little bit out of the city. But a lot of our events will be around the city. We also do outings for schools. So schools can reach out to us and say, hey, we want to take our students to John Hines and we're running this, we have this curricula. Would you guys mind leading us on some bird walks? And we've done anywhere from kindergartners and first graders all the way up to seniors in high school. We've done anywhere from 10 students to, I think one time we had 150 kids show up on 6 buses that we had to figure out for a 2-hour birding outing. Those are usually really awesome. And again, they're kids, so how many are really going to be super interested in birding? But by the end, you get 1 or 2 that are like really into it, and that makes all the difference. So yeah, those are the events that we do. We also have every June we have a Black Excellence in Birding event at the Academy of Natural Sciences, and so everybody's welcome, Black and brown folks, allies. You put on some nice clothes. You come, you get some drinks, some food. Tickets are usually like $50 or something. You get to free reign of the museum. You get behind the scenes access to the bird specimens back in the museum. You get we usually have a panel discussion. So we've had myself and some other birders. One year we had all Black female birders in Philly last year, which was fantastic. And then this year, I think they're planning their guests, and it sounds like it's going to be someone really good. But it's usually a keynote or a panel or something like that. And so, it's really nice. It's usually 150, 200 people that show up, and it's just kind of cool to feel like it's a little night at the museum ish, right? You kind of have the place to yourself, and you can walk around and just kind of hang out. So,
what level of experience do most members have when they join?
Most of our members now, when they first show up are brand new. Most of them, right? And if they aren't brand new, they maybe got a pair of binoculars some grandparent gave to them, that are probably from 1972, and they're trying to figure out how to use them. And they're just most of the time they're just happy to be there. They're happy to be trying something new. I'd say this year in 2023 at least, we had it's over 400 new birders show up, right? And when I say birder, just anyone that came to go birding that, had not gone birding before, based on our RSVPs. So that was amazing. Over 60% are people of color, and over 65% are under 40 years old. So we get a lot of new birders. Some of them, since we've been around for, a couple of years now, are out there now. They're out there taking pictures, going places. Birds are part of their life now, right? Others show up a few times a year and just kind of get their fix, usually in the warmer months, and we get all kinds of folks. And so, but we cater ourselves to the beginner usually, right? Sometimes we'll have a walk where Jeff Kinney, one of our he's like one of the best birders in Pennsylvania. He he does a lot of birding by ear. So sometimes we'll let people go up with him further along the trail where it's a little quieter and they can kind of try some of that if they want to do some of that advanced stuff. Sometimes people hang back and do some different things. So we try to cater to everybody, but typically it's mostly beginner birders because of the demographic that we attract.
What level of birder would you say you are in terms of experience?
Oh, that's a good question. And it would probably depend on who you ask. First, let's define birder, right? So birder for us is really anybody that enjoys the observation of birds in any capacity, right? Um, so I would, I get really uncomfortable when people are like, "Oh, Jason's a birding expert." I am not. I am not. I would say I'm an experienced birder. I've birded all over this country. I've birded in multiple other countries. Am I going to be able to tell you all of the different families of birds and how they related across the entire world? Absolutely not. I'm going to Google it. But I do know enough to be dangerous, to keep people interested, to have fun facts, to, kind of relate things that birds do to what we do as people. So I would say I'm somewhere between intermediate and advanced. And, that's really from the standpoint of um, being able to guide other folks to, find some enjoyment in this.
Let's say someone's interested in birding but doesn't know where to begin. Where do you recommend they start?
Well, I recommend they start in their immediate community, right outside their front door, outside their building, outside their cabin, wherever they are. Um, and the first thing I want them to do is go outside or go to your window and just start to look around, start to be curious, right? You don't need binoculars at that moment, right? If they are privileged enough to have full eyesight and hearing, right? Utilize that. Close your eyes, listen to what you're hearing different times of the day, look and see what's fluttering around in the trees and the bushes, right? That's really the start of it. You kind of have to be curious and you have to be patient enough to sit there and kind of look at what's happening right outside your front door. Once you are there and you're like, oh, wow, that was cool, you're going to notice something. You're going to notice more about that house sparrow that you've probably seen all the time outside your building, but you're going to notice just how striking that black chin is, right? Um, and some of the grays and how they interplay with the browns on its back, right? You're going to notice the difference between the male cardinal and the female cardinal and how her bill stands out so much more because she's a duller color, but her bill looks super orange, right? Um, and so as that starts to happen, you start to then notice other things about other birds, and that's really the precipice of it. You have to be curious, you have to be patient, and you have to want to see what's going on. Once you do that, you can go a bunch of different directions, right? You can buy a bird feeder and say, I don't want to go outside. I want the birds to come to me. I'm going to set up some bird feeders in my backyard. Cool. Awesome. Do that, right? You're still a birder. You can say, I am not satiated and I need to find every bird species that has ever been in Philadelphia ever, right? And you can start listing and driving over the city and signing up for eBird, right? Um, you can decide that you love birds, but the thing you love most about them is sitting in a park and sketching them, right? Or you can decide, oh, I love birding by ear. So you can wake up very early in the morning and drive down to John Hine and just listen to the warblers in the spring, right? So there's a multitude of things you can do. You want to get some basic binoculars, right, to start until you're ready to invest in it. Then I wouldn't spend more than $150 on a decent pair of binoculars, right? You want to get a simple bird guide, but if you don't want to buy a bird guide, you download Merlin. It's free from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It'll tell you all the birds around you, and it's loaded up with data from the community on other bird sightings around you. So, yeah, that's kind of where I tell people to start. And the last thing I would say is find a community that you can share it with, right? And it may just be something as simple as dragging your spouse out to do it with you one day, or finding a local bird club that's doing an outing and going with them, right? Finding an art group that's out sketching stuff outside. Just try to work that passion into a community that you can stick with.
You mentioned eBird. Are there some other online tools that have really gotten people more into birding?
Well, Merlin is the other one. So eBird is community science, right? It's people logging these birds in different locations all over the world, and eBird is regularly expanding. It's through the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. They also have an app called Merlin now, where you can hold it up and it'll listen for the birds. It'll tell you what birds you're hearing. It's generally accurate, but like most building algorithms, right? Sometimes it'll tell you got some weird bird that's like 7 countries to the east, you know. But that's okay. Those two are probably the two most popular. Another one that's really popular is called iNaturalist. A lot of non-birders use that, but I find that some of the bird sightings are really interesting on there. Um, yeah, those would probably be the three. There's other apps and stuff like Audubon has a bird app. There's another bird app called iBird, which is it's a paid app, but it's got good songs and comparisons and stuff like that. Um, yeah, past that, there's not a whole lot of stuff out there. You'll find some different birding games and study guides and stuff like that. There's one I have yet to try out. It's called Birda, Birda, and it's supposed to kind of gamify birding a little bit. So I've had friends, from multiple kind of circles ask me if I've gotten on it yet. But it's it'll challenge you and say like you're challenged this weekend to find 3 different species of blackbird, right? Or as many species of bird in a 1 mile radius, and you'll kind of compete against other people. So that's one I would definitely look into and have people try if they want to have some fun with
I feel like Merlin went through my friends group like a year or 6 months ago. I felt like every
Yeah,
new person was like, "Have you heard about this app that if you just hold it up to the sky, you could hear birds?"
yeah,
And I was like, "No." And then of course I downloaded it. And I was like, "Well, I wonder how good." I have a little bit of woods around me. I was like, "I wonder how good it is." And then all of a sudden, you're every hike you're listening, you have your phone
yeah.
out. Every single time
Hmm.
you're on the deck, you have the phone out. So it's just
Hmm.
it got so much of where I was like, is that something new? And then it comes across, I'm like, oh, I already got that one. So I already
Yeah,
felt
yeah,
like I was trying to
yeah,
Pokemon Go it of very much like, oh, well, I already got that one. It
yeah,
doesn't count. Maybe ruin
yeah.
my sense of enjoying the environment as much if I was doing it like that.
No, but it's exciting, right? Because if you did hear something that you've never heard before, at least your app never heard before, your next thought is going to be, can I go see it, right? If you're able to do that, right? And which is exciting, right? And then hitting that little button as it shows up and being able to read about where it's from, what's its range, right? And so that's really cool for people where they hold it up and they'll send me a screenshot and be like, hey, I have this blackpoll warbler, it says, in my backyard, right? And it's got this like rising and falling whistle, right? That's really sounds like a really squeaky car wheel getting closer and closer to you and then going further away, right? Um, and being able to tell them like that's one of the most impressive migrants of any small songbird in the Western Hemisphere, right? And have them have that enjoyment that this bird that a few weeks before was down in Brazil hanging, southern Brazil hanging, is now in their backyard, right? So um, these things I've seen some birders get, I guess, kind of in their feelings a little bit about the new technology, and it's the whole robble robble get off my lawn thing.
Yeah.
Um, but those folks I think have to come around because these are now new access points for a whole new community, right? And if we want birding and to a larger degree, the study of birds and ornithology and conservation to remain, tools like Merlin are critical, right? Like you talk about Pokemon Go, like that was a whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And I love explaining to people when they're like, what is birding? And I was like, you remember Pokemon Go? It's like that, but like real things, you know? Um, and they're like, oh, okay. I'm like, yeah. So, an eBird is the same thing. It tells you like, hey, somebody saw there's a painted bunting, a male painted bunting at Bartram's Garden in Southwest Philadelphia right now, right? Bird that looks like somebody dipped it in a bag of Skittles, right? And people are losing their minds, and they're like, how does this show up here, right? Like that. That is the kind of thing that you want to share, and you want to make sure people are not limiting themselves in terms of access to technology. So, yeah.
What advice would you offer to beginners who are eager to start birding but feel overwhelmed by the vastness of the avian world? I know that's something that's certainly kind of kept me away from birding is the idea of just like the amount of information you must have for either recognition of sight or sound. If I see a blackbird, I'm like, it could be a crow or a raven. I have no more other information, and a blackbird. I have no other information to really. Every red bird to me is a cardinal. So it's like, how do you get to learn that information for people who might be intimidated by it?
Yeah. So I would say to them to start. Like I tell this to people, especially be absolute beginner birders that come out, especially when they come out in the spring, right? Because once all these migrants show up in the spring, it's man, you can have a breakdown trying to keep up with everything that's out there. Literally, you go to a place like John Hines and there's 17 species of warbler that day, or like something wild, right? And you're trying to listen and look, right? And I tell people, I was like, nope, nope, do not try and do that. I was like, the ones you see, you see. Try to see them well, right? Try to stay calm. Enjoy those birds. They're new to you. But don't try to see everything, because then you're going to see nothing, right? And so, really, I use the example of of the warblers, right? Like, so you will get like a yellow warbler, right? They're all yellow, right? One of the easier warblers to see that hang around all summer, right? And I tell people, enjoy that warbler, learn that warbler, learn its call. It's sweet, sweet, sweet. I'm so sweet. Learn that call, right? And then I want you to flip over to the next time you see a warbler that doesn't look like that. It's similar. It's hopping around in the tree. It's got a flat, pointy bill, but its coloration's a little different. It's got rufous on the top, right, and a little extra yellow flare and a little streaking, and it's twerking. It's bobbing its tail, and you're like, "What is that?" Right? It's a palm warbler, right? They're going to hang down a little lower. They have a different call, right? And so, really, you want to build on what you know, right? You can sit at home and study your bird book and watch YouTube videos, and there's a couple apps that you can practice identifying birds by sound and sight, right? But nothing is going to replace being out there. But you have to just start at a simple spot. It's like reading and writing. You didn't just learn the whole alphabet in one shot, right? You had to learn A, B, C, and then you're like, all right, that next one looks like a backwards B. I'm pretty sure that's a lowercase d, right? But you built on what you learned, right? Same thing with reading and writing. So that's how I tell people to do it. Do not allow yourself to give into the pressure of somehow skyrocketing to be a birding expert after one season of birding. That's really stupid, and it's gonna make you hate birding. Honestly, it's gonna make birding give you anxiety, and that's the last thing you want birding to do.
Yeah, I would say an anxious birder isn't a very effective birder. If you're
Yeah,
running around the woods trying to write your list and make sure you record everything.
which is fine, right? But you cannot do that. It's unhealthy to do that and then finish your day birding and be upset,
Absolutely.
right? Like, especially as a beginner, like you can be, you're gonna have disappointment, right? Like you drive 2 hours because somebody saw a painted bunting and you get there and it's not there, right? That's normal disappointment, right? But when you're first starting out, you really have to fight against that, because it can be this thing where birding is not filling up your cup like it needs to. And so it's easier just to start slow and then build yourself up to that clip, right? To that momentum of actually being able to go out and log 65 species by yourself in the morning, right? But you'll find that you'll feel less pressure, and you'll find more enjoyment in doing it because you started in a controlled state at the beginning.
Can you share a memorable encounter or experience that resonated with you during your birding adventures?
Mm, I have a lot of them. I've birded in some different countries, and most of my enjoyment is around a lot of the birders that I've met, and the situations in which I've seen the birds when I was out with them. And so, one I'll never forget is a ruddy ground quail that I saw in Brazil, and I was with a bird guide. His name is Demis Bucci, and had a free weekend. I asked him to take me out, and he took me to the Atlantic rainforest outside of Sao Paulo, Brazil. And we're walking, and we're seeing all kinds of different cool things, and it's so lush there. It's hard to get a good eye on just anything. And all of a sudden, he just drops to the ground, and it's like looking under this bush. And then he like runs around the other side and drops to the ground. And he's speaking in Brazilian Portuguese. I have no idea what he's saying. And he's calms down. He's like, it's a red quilda. And so I get on the ground and I get a picture, and this silly little thing is just like dotting around in there. And yeah, I'll never forget that, right? Because I didn't realize the significance of that bird, right? But his excitement showed me that, right? Um, and it was one of those moments where I was like, man, us birders are kind of kind of all the same, no matter what country we're in. Different things excite us, and so I actually have it tattooed on my arm now, as part of my bird tattoo sleeve, because I'm never gonna forget that moment, right? It's the same as birding with Karim Boyla in Istanbul in Turkey, and him taking me out to a lake called Lake Büyükçekmece. And the first bird he pointed out in the scope were two flamingos that were migrating up through, on their way to some of their summer grounds, right? Um, and so I just thought that was wild because I never thought I was going to see a flamingo in Turkey, right? um, looking for a great spot of woodpeckers in Amsterdam, which is a pretty common bird. But I'm looking at it, and all of a sudden, I'm in this little town called Austin. This guy comes around the corner, and he's driving a little cart. He's riding the cart, and it's got horses attached to it. And the closer he gets, the more I realize that the cart is miniature and the 4 horses are miniature. But there's a grown man riding on it. And it was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. But I remember seeing that and then looking back up, and there were 4 of those woodpeckers on this dead snag, and they were like hanging out and kind of fencing with each other. And so you get these experiences the whole time. And I like the ones where the bird is in context of the people that love it and the environment that it's in and all that stuff. So,
do you have a favorite bird?
Yeah, my favorite bird is the sandhill crane. I fell in love with that bird. The more I visited, my mom's side of the family is from Idaho, historically Mormon. And so they're all over Utah and Southeast Idaho. And so I would go to my grandmother's house, and, she has a huge field across from her house, and they breed out there every summer. And so when I started birding, consistently, and I went out there, I was like, I'm going to go get these pictures of these sandhill cranes. And, you hear them bugling in the canyon, and it just echoes, and they're beautiful. They have that red, spot on their head, and just these really sharp yellow eyes. And, they're massive, they look you dead in the face. So, yeah, I spent a lot of mornings out there before sunrise, crawling on my belly to try and get close enough to get some shots and not disturb them. And just being out there by myself in the middle of a livestock pasture looking at these cranes. So
I discovered you on Instagram and started following your account and just absolutely love it. Your passion for birding, absolutely. Your passion for birding is fully on display. Where can people follow you, and what do you post about?
Yeah, so on Instagram, my personal account is the Birding Beardsman. And I see you two have a fantastic beard. This is why I agreed to come on the podcast with you.
Thank you, sir.
You got it. We gotta stick together. They can find me there on Instagram, the Birding Beardsman. That's usually where I post most of my content. I don't have a Twitter or X account anymore because that place was pretty wild. And then the Bird Club, In Color Birding Club, at In Color Birding Club, you can find us on Instagram as well. And so I run that account as well, usually. Yeah, those are the 2 spots. On Facebook, In Color Birding, you can find our Facebook page, and then we have a private chat group, which we invite people to. And it's the only reason it's private, so we can keep the spammers out. But in there, we post pictures and stuff. Like there's a whole conversation around the painted bunting going on in there right now. So those are usually places you can find me.
And now, let's hear from our sponsors. It's Saturday morning in your favorite kind of weather. It's a day for hiking. Clearly marked blazes guide you safely along the unobstructed trail, allowing you to get lost in the wonder of nature. Keystone Trails Association makes these moments possible for you in Pennsylvania's great outdoors. KTA's members are dedicated to providing, preserving, protecting, and promoting recreational hiking trails and hiking opportunities in Pennsylvania. Join KTA to help protect the trails you love. New members use the code HELLBENDERS at www.kta-hike.org to save $5 on a yearly membership. Are you looking for your next adventure? Unlock some of the best landscapes in Pennsylvania with the incredibly detailed, highly curated, waterproof maps from the folks at Purple Lizard. They create extraordinary maps of Pennsylvania state forests for people who love to explore the outdoors. Find them at your local outfitters, bike shops, and bookstores, or visit purplelizard.com, where your next adventure begins. Hey, podcast explorers, did you know Pennsylvania state parks and forests are the heartbeat of our Commonwealth? They're not just natural wonders, they're vital for our well-being and local economies. That's where the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation steps in. They rally volunteers, raise funds, and advocate for these precious lands. Join the movement to preserve and enjoy our outdoor treasures. Learn more at paparksandforest.org. Let's keep Pennsylvania untamed and beautiful together. All right, back to the show. I know that some birders keep life lists or records of the birds that they've observed. How does this practice influence your birding experience, and what significance, if any, do you attribute to these lists?
So, like I said, I went through a phase where like the list was everything, right? The list was, you had to just keep adding to it. And I expect that I'll be in phases like that again, right? And so to me, listing is just one enjoyable thing you can do, right? And so I look at it like kind of like sports, right? If you love basketball, you can go out and shoot by yourself. Maybe that's what you want to do that day, right? You can invite some friends over and play a little 3-on-3, a little backyard ball in your driveway, right? You can go to the Y and just run some full court pickup games, right? It's all basketball, but it's different degrees of intensity, what you want to get out of it. And it's the same thing with birding, right? So listing to me is just an enjoyable thing. A couple years ago, I did a big year just in Montgomery County, right? I wanted to see if I could get over 200 species in the county. I think I got 202 or something like that. But my last bird, I think, was a barred owl that I flushed in Valley Forge Park, right? And I remember after I got over 200 at the end of the year, I didn't bird for another 2 months after that because I was exhausted, right? Like I was literally exhausted of chasing just to try to get to that number, right? And although I don't regret it, I'm very happy I did it. It was so much fun, right? It takes effort, right? I was talking about my buddy Jeff, one of our board members, and his girlfriend Angela is also one of our board members. They were all over the state this year trying to get over 300 birds, and Jeff got over 300 species, right? And I know he probably slept for 3 days straight after that, right? So listing to me, and I want people to understand this should be a different flavor of birding that you can pick up and put down when you want to, right? Because I can guarantee you, like outside of the people that do like a full big year in the United States or a global big year, they're really just writing books, right? No one's inviting you on Good Morning America, right? Like it's a thing you can do, but you should be doing it for your own enjoyment, right? Whatever you do with the listing, it shouldn't be because you want to impress anybody else. Like do the list because you want to have the memories attached with those birds on that list for you to look through later on in life and say, oh man, like I went to Tanzania in March with my wife. I dragged her on a 10-day birding excursion. And I think I picked up like close to 400 new birds, right? I don't remember every single one of them, right? By exact sighting. But I got a large amount of them that I do, right? And I enjoy seeing them and what I thought and like how they look different than how they look in the book. And like it, and so that's what I tell people with listening is like, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. And it'll always be a great tool that you can have in your arsenal.
And I'm sure it also is a good data gathering tool in terms of like, have I actually seen this bird before? Just on a basic level, I'm sure every birding should probably do it just to make sure they're keeping track of what they're seeing.
Yeah. And I know very, very accomplished birders that have led bird tours all over the world. Some that travel all over the country, and some of them don't keep eBird, right? Some of them will just keep a written list. Some of them don't keep a list at all, which blows my mind sometimes. Now, my anxiety would not allow me to do that necessarily. But all of it is okay, right? Now, the great thing about eBird and the listening is that you're providing data back to these communities that are studying birds, right? Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and they farm that data out to other institutions. That's really important, right? Because when it comes to conservation, you're just not going to get that many data points by going out in the field by yourself in the summer, right? So that's where I say if you like listing, or even if you just tolerate it, right? Just throw an eBird list on there, right? It's helpful to the community. Um, but don't make it your bird identity, because I feel like it gets really stale after a while. I mean, unless you're a billionaire and you can fly all over the world and see all 10,000 species of birds, then have at it.
For the non-birders that are listening to this, what's a big year?
Yeah, a big year is when you pick a set geographic area and you try to see as many species or log as many species of bird as you can specifically in that area. So in the United States, there's kind of two flavors. There's a full U.S. big year, which includes Alaska and Hawaii, right? There's a lower 48 states big year. I think the records are 700 or 800 or something like that. I can't remember at this point. There's North American big year where you can do Canada and Mexico. Some folks have done global big years where they log 7,000 species in a year out of the 10,000 species, which is insane to me.
Yeah.
I get tired just thinking about that. Like the amount of flying and I got tired just trying to see 200 species in my county and actually find a way to enjoy all 200 versus 7,000 across the whole world. Like, now granted, some of these folks have written books and they're fantastic. But it takes a certain perspective to do that. So that's what a big year is. You can do a big year in your backyard. If you just want to say, I'm going to sit outside every day for 30 minutes and see how many bird species fly over, come to my feeders. Perfect. Beautiful.
Can you share any locations in Pennsylvania that stand out as remarkable for bird watching?
Oh, yeah. So one of the first ones I think of, which I've never actually been to, and I need to, is Presque Isle State Park up in Erie.
Yeah.
Right. I need to get my life together and get up there. I've had a lot of friends go up there. Um,
The place is phenomenal. Phenomenal.
yeah, that's what everyone tells me. Um, I think on the southeast side, John Hines Wildlife Refuge is similar, right? Both of them have these kind of features that force birds into them, right? So John Hines and you kind of catching the Atlantic flyway migration up the coast, right? You come past the Delaware Bay, right? And you're either a bird, you continuing up through Wilmington past the airport, you get past all those damn airplanes, and all of a sudden there's a big, beautiful refuge, and you're gonna stop there and eat, right? Versus if you went across the Delaware Bay and you ended up hunkering down in Cape May. So John Hines is absolutely tremendous spot. Um, let's see, where else would I go? I love gulls. So I spend a lot of time, at least in the winter, at big bodies of water. So Nockamixon State Park. I'll go to Green Lane Reservoir. Sometimes I'll go out to like French Creek or Marsh Creek. Most of these places are in the southeast, right? So those places are great. In the springtime, if you are looking for warblers, right, and you're in Southeast PA, Fairmount Park, Wissahickon Trails. You can even get a lot of warblers right behind Independence Mall because they manicure the trees so well that you can see right up in there and see all the warblers bopping around, which is great. Yeah, so really, there's a lot of spots, and I would suggest to people that even if you're not going to sign up for eBird and use it to log your birds, you can go on there as a guest and you can put in your zip code or your town. It'll show you all the birding hotspots around you. It'll show you the birds people have seen there within the last 3, 7, 30 days. So yeah, I am also, if anyone wants to message me on Instagram and tell me of some cool birding places across the state that I need to go, I'm happy to take those recommendations.
Stop leaving the country, man. Go to Presque Isle. What are you doing?
I know, right? I know, right? It's stupid. I gotta get my priorities straight.
What would you say about Pennsylvania as a place for birding? Do you think Pennsylvania is a good place that has a lot of options and ability to see different birds?
I do. I do, and it's not necessarily the state itself, right? It does have, you have a lot of major rivers. You're right in the middle of the Atlantic Flyway. You have access to the Great Lakes region, right with Erie, right, and a lot of things. These kind of force birds into, a lot of birds will come up through Philly, and they'll just beeline it across the state for Erie, right? And that's, you know, in that waterway up there, there's a stopping point for them to eat if they're going to continue further north into Canada or even breed around Erie or northern PA. I like Pennsylvania because of its proximity to kind of a bunch of different things, right? So obviously being able to pop over to Jersey, right, and get, Cape May is insane, right? Um, Popping up to New York, you got Central Park, and it's a migrant trap, right? Even, a lot of people don't talk about it, but down in the Maryland, right, the Chesapeake, and there's a lot of bird activity down there. So I like Pennsylvania because I feel like it's the peak birding along the Atlantic Flyway, right? We don't get things too early, right? We're not getting all the migrating warblers in March or April, like they might be in some of the southern states. We're getting them in mid-May, right? And then they're back again mid-August to mid-September, ish for their fall migration. So we don't spend a lot of time without them. In Pennsylvania, also looking at the map, right? There's a lot of great green space throughout the state, right? Underdeveloped space, which is great, right? But underbirded, which is not great. So, really healthy hunting community within Pennsylvania, which does a lot for bird conservation, right? And so how do we marry that up, right, and get folks out exploring the rest of the state in a safe place, right? It's one of the things I thought about when I was listening to some of your podcast episodes, right? Like you're touching things around different parts of the state that I'm familiar with, right? Um, so how do we get people excited about that, right? I feel like Pennsylvania is great for that, and I can tell you, at least in southeastern PA and the Philly community, there's no other big city doing it like we are with birding, right? Trying to really make it accessible. Like there's Feminist Bird Club, there's Philly Queer Birders, right? There's a bunch of new groups now. And like, other cities like Chicago is building something new. LA has a bunch of great groups, but on the East Coast, I think it's just Philly and New York. I think we got it, but I would give Philly the edge over New York for a bunch of different things, including sports, but that's just my bias.
Yeah. You hear that, Pittsburgh? Mount up.
Yeah, that's right.
There's birds out there that exhibit really fascinating behaviors. Can you tell me about a particular bird species you've encountered that showcases a really intriguing behavior?
Yeah, I love ravens, um, blue jays, magpies, crows. I love all of the birds in that family, and just the amount of intelligence, right? Um, so ravens, one of the coolest things I like about them is just they're not group oriented, right? So you've never, like you mentioned to me earlier, like if you saw a blackbird, you're like, oh, maybe it's a crow, maybe it's a raven, right? Well, ravens are usually by themselves, and if they're not, there's usually one other raven with them, but they're not rolling around like 30 deep like crows are. Crows are bands of delinquents, right? Every time I see a group of crows, I think of one of those videos of those kids running into Wawa and just ransacking it and running out, right? Like crows they're just a mess. But ravens, um, I've seen different documentaries on how they communicate and the different noises and sound that they make, right? And every time you hear that deep guttural call or clicking, right? And you think to yourself, what are they saying to each other? Right. And you realize that it's just as complex a conversation as probably you and I are having, but we have no idea what it is, right?
Yeah.
The other thing about that family of birds is the intelligence to solve puzzles, right? To recognize things and patterns, right? And one story I remember hearing is, I think it was from somewhere out in Oregon, and it wasn't ravens, it was crows, but um, they had a gentleman he was studying their ability to transfer knowledge to their offspring, right? And so he would put on a white mask and he would go and he would I guess, somehow gently harass these crows while they were sitting on eggs, right? They would call at him, and they were not happy he was there, but he had on this mask, and then he didn't show up. He let their babies be born, and their babies hatched and fledged, and were still hanging around with the group, right? And he went back with the mask on, and the babies knew he was a bad guy, right? The babies had never seen him, right? As far as they knew, it was just another random human walking around. But the mask, the pattern, somehow the parents transferred that language to those offspring. Hey, if you see the dude in the white mask, that's a bad guy. You need to call at him. You know, like that stuff to me is like when I think to myself, hopefully this doesn't happen. But if we humans uh, find ourselves in a position where we no longer deserve the earth, and we are taken out, right? Crows and ravens, I feel like give them another billion years, they're gonna take this thing over, right? It's gonna be like Planet of the Apes, but with crows. Maybe they'll have a world war with the dolphins. I don't know, but that family of birds, I just find to be really fascinating because of their level of intelligence.
Whenever I hear a fact about a crow, it almost seems made up. Like their
Yeah,
ability to
yeah,
solve puzzles or problems, it's just so fascinating.
yep, yep. That's right. That's right. And they're dropping coins in machines to get treats, right? And they're able to figure out how to use tools to get food out of tight spaces, right? It's just, and they're not the only birds that do stuff like that, but you know, that family, and including magpies, which on the West Coast, they're like a more fun group of crows, right? But that's how I find relation sometimes to these birds, right? Is when you see them do things that humans would do, right? And you realize sometimes that we're not, number one, we're not so unique and we're not so special. And that should give us some humility to say, okay, well, maybe we need to sit back and maybe understand a little bit more about what these birds are doing, right? And corvids are a good example of that.
How do you approach the challenge of identifying bird species, especially when they might appear similar or elusive in the wild?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. Um, and this is something that plagues a lot of new birders, right? It can be really discouraging, right? One of the ones that happens all the time is red-winged blackbirds, right? So um, the male red-winged blackbird is all black. It's got the big red patch on its shoulder, right? And it's sitting up and yelling every spring, conklary, sitting on top of a cattail somewhere. Well, the female is not that color. She's heavily streaked, right? And she's not usually up on the cattail. She's usually down getting the nest ready, right, in the marsh, wherever she is, right? And what happens is the females will come to bird feeders and stuff, and people are like, oh man, I just got this wild sparrow at my feeder, right? And it's because people have learned usually their first sparrows, right? So they got a house sparrow, and then they'll have song sparrow, maybe field sparrow, Lincoln sparrow, swamp sparrow, some of which have a lot of streaking, right? So to them, it's like, oh, sparrow, right? And you see it every spring on bird pages on Facebook. Um, and really, the way to backtrack that, and someone, Katrina Clark, one of our board members, she did a talk the other night called the pedagogy of leading a bird walk. And one thing she said was when you teach somebody a new skill, they're either going to overuse it or underuse it, right? And she's generally speaking to her experience with children, right? So it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I was like, man, that is so true because you're teaching new birders about sparrows being some of the most streaky birds, like heavily streaked on their breasts and their back, right? And so their first thought is sparrow, right? And so being able to then back somebody off that gently and say, okay, now let's look at the shape of the bill or the beak, right? Let's look at the size. Let's look at what it's doing. How big is it compared to the other sparrows that are around, right? Um, that part is a part where you really need some patience. You need people not to be short with you or dismissive, right? But one good way to do it is spend more time observing the bird and just kind of the thing that you think you know about it, put that off to the side, find a few other traits of the bird and log those, right? And see if it still amounts to what you think it's going to be. I had this gentleman in Philly named Ed Edge. Yeah, I've heard him tell people like anytime you're looking to ID a bird, pick three, at least three identifiable features before you make your call, right? And most people, most new birders, they're going to go for one, you know, because they want to get the bird, So pick three. It takes patience. It's because you're excited, and you're like, oh, it's a Connecticut warbler, and no, it's a common yellow throat. Relax, But that's because you're excited, it's a good thing. So
Well, that rolls perfectly into the next question. Birding involves patience and observation. How has this practice influenced your life in and out of birding?
ooh. Um yeah, so I mean patience and observation, it's influenced my life personally by just making me slow down a little bit and connect more with my environment, right? There's a number of times where I'm observing a bird or observing something else, and one leads me to the other, right? I'm observing a bird, and all of a sudden I see a fox, right? Because I was there observing that bird, or I'm looking for a fox, and oh, boom, the fox is getting harassed by a northern harrier, right? Um, and so personally, that process allows me to just be more connected with my environment, right? Like I said, I used to hike a lot. I used to run through the forest a lot. And now I cannot go to the forest and not bird. I cannot go anywhere and not bird. Like I could never be an outdoor runner at this point, right? Because I would keep stopping. To me, I don't understand how anyone does do that, right? Because you're passing all these things too fast. Um, as a professional, right? So I work in my full time job is in vaccine development, right? And I've been doing that for um, about almost 20 years now. Um, and the part about birding that no one talks about is the ability to kind of use your memory a little bit. So when I go out and bird, I don't keep my eBird list open and check everything every second, right? I bird and then I sit down with a cup of coffee afterwards. I go through my eBird list and I'm like, how many species of red winged bird, how many individuals of red winged blackbird did I see today? Right. And it may not be exact, but it's a good estimate and it's a good train on my memory. Right. So that's helped me a lot. And then lastly, just how to deal with other people. Starting the bird club and the nonprofit and things I've learned from other birders, things I've learned from other nonprofits, from community members, helps me in every aspect of my life in terms of being patient and understanding different perspectives. And it's these birders that we share this love of birds, but every other part of their life is totally different than mine, right? And the birding that brings us together allows me to be patient and take all of them in as who they are as individuals and find value in it, right? Because I don't want to mess up the connection that we do have in the birds, right? So it's a great community builder, birding is.
Another perfect segue. Birding can be a solitary pursuit or a shared experience. What are your thoughts on the community aspect of birding?
I think it is one of the best communities that we have in the outdoor recreation world or the outdoor hobbyist world, right? Um, Although it is one of the best, I think it has a lot of space to grow, right? And so, it's kind of an interesting spot, right? Because not most, but a lot of outdoorsy people are hunters, right? Hunters, different types for different reasons, right? Um, and then the other set of outdoor folks are maybe athletes, hikers, long distance runners, mountain climbers, right? Mountain bikers, right? Like also great, right? Birding, herping, foraging, right? Um, these are, I would say, are a little less impact based, right? A little less invasive on the environment, just in terms of your impact when you step into a space, right? You're not killing something, or, well, I guess foraging, you're taking some nice mushrooms out of there. But you know, that kind of stuff I feel like has a large place to grow, right? Because it doesn't require, in many cases, access to, expensive BMX bikes or expensive guns or hunting gear, or, it's just decent pair of shoes, transportation to the spot. If you want some binoculars and maybe some sort of natural resource or guide to help you around your way. And so I think it has a lot of space to grow, because post COVID, a lot of people woke up and was like, "Oh man, the only place I can go is outside." And a lot of them found out that they loved it, And so because of that, I think we have an opportunity to grow the space as birders. We got a lot of our community members, we have a lot of them that identify as COVID birders, right? Um, we've also had a lot of folks that came for birding and ended up meeting somebody and getting into something else, right? They came for birding and it ended up becoming a herper, right? Um, which I find is fantastic, right? I don't know anything about herping, right? And I'm not super big on snakes, but I'm down with people that do it, right? I follow them all on Instagram. And so that's really where I think birding is great, because it's an on ramp just to the experience of the natural world. And birds are everywhere, right? They literally on every continent, right? So you can't go anywhere with no birds. So yeah, I think it's got a lot of space to grow. I think we have a lot of things to learn about what constitutes a healthy community, a very inclusive community. Um, and I know other outdoor groups and activities are trying to forge that as well. I just think birding actually has a lot more momentum than some of those other groups right now.
The connection between birding and mindfulness is often emphasized. How does birding contribute to mindfulness, presence, and a deeper connection to the environment for you?
So mindfulness is something relatively new to me when it comes to birding, and I have, I know Ollie Merker and Tama Watts, both members of the Mindfulness Birding Network, right? Both have written books. One of the things that I appreciate about that approach is that it forces you to take inventory of yourself just as much as you are of the environment around you. And I remember I took my sister and my niece to go birding in San Diego, and we met up with Tama and a few other folks. And I had never birded under a mindfulness moniker before, although I do take my time a lot of times and I am patient. But she said to the crowd, she said, "Hey, I want you to take inventory of how you feel right now, right? And then when we're done, we're going to come back and either you can share how you feel then, or you can just keep it to yourself, right? But take inventory of what it is, right?" And that was the first time I had done that. I've been birding for such a long time. I had never made that my specific ask to see, did I feel better? Did I feel worse? Did I feel lighter, heavier? Right. Um, and so I think people need to understand when I talked about different flavors of birding, right? The mindfulness part of it is a tool that you should have, right? Because if you're going to be able to get on that roller coaster of listing, right, and just being all over the place, you better be able to land somewhere soft with the mindfulness part of it and be able to appreciate both of those, because that is what will help you not resent either side of that extreme, right? Secondarily, from a health standpoint, being outdoors, walking, birding, right? All of them have been shown to reduce anxiety, reduce stress, right? They obviously create community, right? And so that part of it, I think mindfulness is actually going to be a really big growth point for birding over the next 10 to 20 years, because not everybody, like I said, wants to be super intense with it. And mindfulness is a consistent way to enjoy the birds, but also help yourself, which is not many things out there that you can do that are low impact that work like that, right? So
In your opinion, what role does birding play in conservation efforts?
I think it's going to be the most important thing for bird conservation for perpetuity, honestly, right? Like every scientist, ornithologist um, that I've met, birds, right? Now, granted, they have more tools in the toolbox because they're in the lab and in the field and studying and taking data. Um, but as much as those people bird, they can't do it by themselves, right? They cannot advocate for these species. And we saw that we lost, billions of birds, in the last 4 to 5 decades. Um, and so to me, if I have a group of 100 people and I introduce them to birding, the goal is that at least 50 of them keep the skill of birding in terms of knowing that they have access to that, they can go enjoy that, right? Of those 50, I would hope that 5 to 10 consider conservation and study the natural world as a career if they are students, right? Or if they're not students, if they're adults, something that they can contribute to and feel good about, right? They can donate their money, their time, their efforts. Um, that to me is the future of conservation, right? Is like I used earlier with the basketball analogy, right? You learn how to play basketball. You can still go do it, but maybe you want to invest some money to go support your favorite professional team because you love it that much, right? And you want to say, I'm going to drop $300 on these tickets to go see Joel Embiid, right? It's the same thing. I'm going to drop $300 on this pledge to the American Bird Conservancy because they're doing great work with bobolinks, and bobolink conservation. And so to me, it's the I don't want to say minor leagues, but it's the foundation, it's the growth place for everything that's going to come up through conservation, right? Because there's nothing that's going to replace what is it like? I've seen different estimates, anywhere from like 15 to 45 million birders, right, in this country, right? Just in this country, right? Like this, that's insane. You can't replace that with any number of undergraduate ecology majors, right? Um, so that's kind of how I see it, right? It's just this never-ending bubbling up from the surface energy that if we use it the right way and make sure it's open to everyone, bird conservation will not have a problem sticking around, for decades to come.
How would you describe the relationship between birders and hunters? Is it adversarial?
I think if people let it be adversarial, it will be, right? I don't think it needs to be. I think a, a lot of things can be true, right? Number one, um, hunters do contribute a lot to the money that's required to keep these natural spaces open, right? Second thing that's true is that it's okay to not feel comfortable with somebody killing a beautiful duck that you like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Third thing that's true, it's also okay if that hunter decides they want to kill that duck and use it to feed themselves and their family, right? To me, although I personally don't like it, it is technically no different than me going to get a chicken from Giant, right? Like it was a living thing and I killed it or I bought it killed for me to eat, right? Now, I've had to grow in this space over the years, right? Um, I think the places where it gets adversarial, right, is one, birders are always looking for places where they can contribute to things as much as hunters, right? And we buy duck stamps and we do different things, right? But hunters have a infrastructure to contribute to the spaces that they want to use that birders don't necessarily have, right? We don't have to buy birding licenses or fishing licenses, right? So that piece, I think, there just needs to be some understanding, right? I don't think that because hunters um, contribute that way that they are, totally exclusively, you know, entitled to anything with the space, right? They're entitled to be able to hunt there. That's about it, right? Um, the other part I found is with waterfowl, right? Like it does get adversarial because we log our waterfowl, right? If we see a cool eider or a sea duck or something, I've seen it multiple times. It happens every winter. Please don't put this on eBird because we don't want hunters coming to kill it, right? Because the hunter is going to look at this and say, "Oh, you know, uh, um, a surf scoter, you know, on the Susquehanna River is a good pull for them, right? Um, and maybe they want to kill it and eat some and mount it or something. I don't know, right? But that's where I see it getting weird, right? Which is, understandable, right? You want people to come see the bird. The hunter's like, I want to shoot the bird, right? I don't think we're never going to be in a place where we um, eliminate hunting or birding, right? I do think there's opportunity for shared appreciation for the space and the creatures. I've met a lot of hunters that have the utmost reverence for the things that they shoot and kill. And all of them that I've met they don't waste food, right? They eat it, right? I think those same hunters are uh, not happy, to say it nicely, with other hunters that don't follow that same code, right? That waste things and kill just for the sake of killing. Um, so I think there's actually a lot of space there where we can come together, right? Now, I can't solve it for the vegans, right? I
Yeah,
cannot,
yeah,
right? I
yeah.
used to be vegan. I fully understand it, fully understand it, right? But there's just I think there's places in this country where uh, there's hills that you're going to die on, and there's hills that I just don't think are worth it in terms of um, bringing communities together, right? And I think hunters and birders actually have a lot more in common than we would let on many times. I do think birders, as we grow, we'll hopefully grow in some political power to help, find ways to contribute more to, um, preserving space, right? Like keeping green space, stopping development, right? Hunters are interested in the same thing. So, yeah, that one, we could probably do a whole podcast episode on that topic. But I got to say, the hunters that I've met, are pretty good. Um, Actually, I have more of a problem with fishermen, man. I'll tell you what,
Yeah,
can't be leaving that line around, man.
yeah. That's
That's
bad.
where like birders I've seen get pissed off more about that than somebody going out and hunting some pheasants, or I was a guy hunting mourning doves last year, and I didn't even know mourning doves was something you could hunt in this state. I thought that was pretty fascinating. But yeah, it's the fishermen and the fishing line that I think birders get the most upset about sometimes.
How can birding inspire others to protect wildlife and their habitats?
Mm. It gives you a connection point, right? It gives you a connection point. So um think about it, right? Like I am more inclined to spend resources, time, effort, advocacy to protect polar bear if I've gone to the Arctic Circle and seen polar bears hunting, seen polar bear cubs, seen dead polar bear who can't eat because there's no ice pack. That changes you, right? And it's the same thing right outside your front door, right? If you see lack of diversity, right? The only birds you see are house sparrows and rock pigeons, right? And you say to yourself, well, why not? And you look up and down your block and you see there's no trees on your block in North Philly, right? Well, that now creates a point of advocacy because the weekend before you went down to John Hines with In-Color Birding Club and you saw 45 different species of bird, right? So now down the street in your neighborhood in North Philly, when they have a proposal to either build a new apartment building or build a green space in a park, you're more inclined to advocate for the green space, right? So the birds create a connection point for this where we don't have we don't always have foxes or coyotes. We don't have red wolves anymore. We don't have mountain lions over here. Occasionally a black bear will show up somewhere in the suburbs, right? But those species are not here consistent enough for people to create connection with the environment and advocacy, but birds are. And they don't stay here all year round. Some of them are migrants, but it's enough to show people what a difference they can make.
What do you think about the future of birding?
Oh, I think by the time I'm about to check out from this earth, uh, it's going to be a much more recognizable and accessible thing for people to do globally. Um, I do think it's going to change, right? I think it's going to be, younger generations are going to introduce new technology, right? Um, I think it's going to get itself into some fights, politically and otherwise, right? Which, it has been and will continue to. But my goal, my hope, right, is that at least in Philly, um, birding is something that is just done across the city, right? Like I listen to sports talk radio sometimes around here, and there's some older hosts, right? Talk about Philly versus New York as the mecca of basketball, right? Or occasionally some old Italian guy will call into the radio station and talk about the history of baseball in Philadelphia, right? But if you look at Philadelphia, it's actually, I would argue, one of the most important cities in the history of the study of birds in North America, right? We had Alexander Wilson, we had Audubon, both of which have some very troublesome points in history. Let's be honest about it, right? We had Charles Peale. We had some of the first bird collections in museums down at Independence Mall at the Academy, right? Like, it was very, very important in terms of the study of ornithology. And so imagine if you looked at all the lists of recreational activities that were happening around Philadelphia regularly, right? A lot of them would be sports. But what if in that top 10 list was birding for all communities, right? Like I don't know if we'll ever get there, but that to me is the goal, right? Is that it's something that gets introduced in every PE class or science class in elementary school or middle school and high school. It becomes a natural part of every community organization. So churches are hosting birding trips and community centers, and businesses are going on birding walks in the middle of their workday to get their staff outside. Like, that is what I want it to be. And I think you're going to see an uptick in the next, now through, let's say, the next 10, 15, 20 years. There's so many young people coming into birding that it's going to shift things a lot faster than I think people are, older birders are used to, right? I'm excited about it, right? A good example is, changing the bird names, right? There's a lot of birds that are named honorific names after some pretty old racist dudes. And so they made a decision, the AOS, to, change all the honorific names because we don't want to be in a situation where we have to decide who was more racist than another one. That's a big shift. And it's caused some reverberations, but it's shifting like that because young people are not messing around no more around some of this stuff. So I think we got to kind of strap in and get ready for that.
Where should people go if they want to learn more about the In Color Birding Club?
Yes, you can email us at info@incolorbirding.org. You can go to our website, incolorbirding.org. You can email me, Jason, at incolorbirding.org. Our Instagram is incolorbirding or at incolorbirding. And like I said, if you just search In Color Birding Club on Facebook, you'll find our public page and our private group chat. You can join both of those.
Jason, I really appreciate you talking to us today.
No, thank you, Christian, for taking the time and for amplifying the message here. It's pretty exciting, and someone needs to take me to see a hellbender somewhere, because that would change my whole life.
I can work on that.
Yeah, I think we need to make that happen. But thank you so much for having us again, man. Really do appreciate it.
I want to thank my guest, Jason Hall, for joining the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Meta for more information about upcoming episodes. You can support the podcast by buying merch at hemlockstohellbenders.com, or you can click support this show in the podcast description to provide a monthly donation. If you're a Pennsylvania business interested in advertising with the podcast, email us at hemlockstohellbenders@gmail.com. This has been Hemlocks to Hellbenders. I'll see you out there. Hosting, production, and editing by Christian Alexanderson. Music by John Sauer. Graphics by Matt Davis.